Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Barbara Valotskova. I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and I'll be serving as a moderator for today's panel discussion. Today, we'll be discussing the ASEAN Economic Community AEC Strategic Plan 2026-2030, which is especially important because it was released recently in May 2025 at the 46th ASEAN Summit in Malaysia, alongside the ASEAN Community Vision 2045. This means that the AEC Strategic Plan concludes the implementation of the AEC Blueprint 2025 and has set the economic direction for ASEAN through 2030. As many of you may know, the strategic plan has 6 strategic goals that you can see on the screen, including an action-oriented community, a sustainable community, an enterprising, bold and innovative community, an adaptable and proactive community, a nimble and resilient community, and an inclusive, participatory, and collaborative community. So besides these broad goals, the plan contains 44 objectives and 192 strategic measures. And this indicates that it is a highly ambitious 5-year strategic roadmap that aims to deepen trade, services, and investment integration across ASEAN, foster innovation and sustainable economic practices, accelerate digital and technology transformation, strengthen economic partnerships, supply chain, food and energy security, and promote inclusive growth across ASEAN. However, while the plan supports the region's aspiration to become the world's 4th largest economy, it arrives at a time of profound transformation and uncertainty. As you know, given the resurgence of trade protectionism, exemplified by a more assertive US tariff regime, the restructuring of global supply chains through onshoring and nearshoring activities, and also the disruptive impacts of rapid digitalisation and demographic change. Therefore, we are here and we need to ask, is AEC Strategic Plan 2026-2030 truly fit for purpose? And to help us answer this question, we have invited 4 experts. Before I introduce them, I would like to remind each of them that they have 8 to 10 minutes to present their key arguments. And after all speakers are done with their presentations, then I'll ask a few more specific questions, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. So, with this point in mind, I'll proceed to briefly introduce our speakers in order in which they will present. And these are just brief introductions for their full impressive profiles. And you can refer to their biographies at our CAG website. So to begin with, we have Mr. Manu Bhaskaran, who is a partner of the Centennial Group, a strategic advisory firm headquartered in Washington, D.C. As founding CEO of its Singapore subsidiary, Centennial Asia Advisors, he coordinates the Asian business of the group, and he is also an adjunct senior research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies. Our second speaker is Ms. Lim May Ann, who is the Director of Multilateral Relations, Data Policy and Partnerships at technology consultancy firm Access Partnership, and is concurrently the Emeritus Director at the Asia Cloud Computing Association. Then we have Dr. Yose Rizal Damuri, who is the Executive Director at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta. Concurrently, he serves as the advisor to G20 Indonesia Committee, co-chair of Indonesia National Committee of Pacific Economic Council, and is the founder of Indonesia Bureau of Economic Research. And last but not least, we have Dr. Dennis Yu, who is a senior research fellow at the Center on Asia and Globalization at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And previously, Dennis was the director of the APEC Policy Support Unit from 2011 to 2022. So we have a great lineup with us today, and let's start with Manu. Manu, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dennis and organizers, for inviting me to speak. Um, I'm going to approach this as an economist who's covered the region for a while, but also as a person who's involved in some companies that have region-wide dealings. And I'd like to focus my remarks on the central question, what more needs to happen to move the needle on ASEAN integration so that it is something relevant to people on the ground, so that economic agents actually change their behavior. I mean, otherwise it's just rhetoric, right? I mean, you have to have actions that actually change behavior on the ground to make a difference. And a lot of what I say may sound a bit negative and critical, but I think these are the facts, right? If you look at the achievements so far, I think it is fair to say that the AEC and its predecessor, ASEAN Free Trade Agreement and so on, have really not led to greater integration. If you take various metrics of integration, say intra-Asian trade and so on, there hasn't really been that much change, right? I think despite the fact that 99% of ASEAN tariffs have been eliminated, we have not seen a big increase in intra-ASEAN trade. In fact, if anything, between 2022 and 2023, there's a small decline, right, from about 22%, 22.5% to 21.5%. Most of ASEAN's trade is still conducted with partners outside the region. And what intra-ASEAN trade there is, if you dig into the figures, is really Singapore's role as an entrepot hub, trading with many different countries. It's less, indigenous Philippine demand for indigenously produced Thai products. And it reflects a lot of the multinational company production grids in the region. So I would argue it's not real economic integration in the sense that you find that in, say, the European Union and so on. And the problem is that there are a lot of non-tariff barriers, regulatory fragmentation, and all these behind-the-border issues. So in practice, integration remains quite piecemeal. I mean, non-tariff barriers have been raised very often by companies as a problem. Malaysia maintains protective policies that limit car imports from other ASEAN countries. Thailand has licensing and standards requirements that act as informal trade barriers. Now, some of that might go with Mr. Trump, but who knows, right? So for businesses interested in practical result, the question is really whether AEC and these initiatives achieve something that is meaningful to them. So what is meaningful to a company? It is this. We are in a world where increasingly economies of scale matter. There's a reason why the winners in the new economy tend to be countries, basically the United States and China, which have unified, integrated, and large markets. So if we are to compete with China in all the new emerging areas where China is becoming actually very competitive, we need scale. And the reality is that these initiatives that we have here, with the AEC and so on, do not allow the companies to achieve scale. Don't get me wrong, I mean, it's better to have AEC than not have it. There are certain things that help, but it doesn't go far enough, anywhere near far enough. And I think as we move ahead with this new world of greater trade frictions, I think this will become more and more pertinent and more necessary for companies if they are to survive and compete. Right? Another way of looking at this is the single production base idea, right? And that is the original and quite rightly the objective of the AEC. But I think it's fair to say, again, if you look at what companies are doing, the initial ASEAN Free Trade Agreement did result in some consolidation. Some of the fast-moving consumer durables companies non-durable companies did consolidate production in one and was able to export these products to others. But it remained there. It didn't go beyond that and hasn't gone far enough. So if you look at the behavior of multinational companies, they still operate their ASEAN supply chains on a country-by-country basis rather than on a region-wide basis. And the reasons given are things that you probably have heard of: complex customs procedures, inconsistent product standards, and restrictions on labor mobility, right? If you dig deeper, okay, what's going on? What you find is that the various tools and frameworks that the AEC offers are not fully utilized. Um, for instance, you look at surveys, only about half of the firms across the region actually make use of ASEAN's preferential tariff schemes. And this is largely due to the complexity of compliance and limited awareness and inconsistencies in implementation across countries. The ASEAN single window has been identified as something that really does help some companies. So that is one piece of good news. But again, there are issues, in terms of the need to streamline customs clearance and documentation. All these issues still get in the way of the ASEAN single window really being all that effective. So if you could look forward then, the ASEAN's plans and visions do not seem to me to address the real fundamental stumbling blocks. First of all, there are huge gaps in development between the more developed parts of ASEAN and the less prosperous parts of ASEAN. So we have a two-tier ASEAN, and that makes it difficult to achieve consensus. And ASEAN is basically a consensus-based organization, and that is why I think we find it difficult sometimes to move ahead and agree on coherent policies that actually make a difference. And I think I don't see that changing. So to try and end on a more constructive note, I mean, what needs to happen? What do we need to do to revitalize the AEC project? I think the ASEAN Business Advisory Council has come up with some very practical ideas, and maybe the first thing to do is to just implement some of them. They've suggested, for instance, an ASEAN business entity framework. In other words, if a company secures this license, then it's able to operate across the region in a fairly seamless way, right? They will get operational flexibility, including easier movement of staff and ability to outsource operations and so on without regulatory restrictions. That idea has been suggested for more than a year. So far, nothing has happened. They've also suggested a single ASEAN initial public offer prospectus. So you have one IPO prospectus that is accepted across ASEAN, and so that makes listing in different markets in ASEAN, stock markets in ASEAN, much easier. And the final suggestion they had was the ASEAN QR code to speed up the implementation of a regional payments ecosystem. So I think if we can just focus on a few practical things that may not be too difficult to implement, demonstrate that they work, then maybe you get some momentum behind more broader, full regional integration efforts. So the second set of ideas I have is really to focus on bite-sized integration. Let's not try to do too ambitious things because those things don't work in ASEAN. What do I mean by bite-sized? Well, a large bite thing would be the Greater Mekong sub-region. The ADB and Japan devised this scheme in 1992. It actually has been very successful, but it only applies to the northern part of ASEAN. But it has resulted in an increased flow of goods and services and capital and people, even electricity. So that's a success. And we should try and broaden that to other parts of ASEAN. The Singapore-Johor Special Economic Zone, I think, has great potential. It's clear that there will be immense synergies if both countries can agree on what needs to be done in terms of connectivity, customs clearance, immigration clearance, and so on. And I'm pretty sure that if this works, I'm pretty sure that the Riau Islands province of Indonesia would want to come and enjoy. Then we get a recreation of the growth triangle idea of 1989 to 1997, which unfortunately didn't survive the Asian financial crisis. But maybe we can revive that. And there are other small-scale integration efforts going on in the power energy cooperation business. For instance, Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam at the recent summit meeting agreed to cooperate on renewable energy exports, Vietnam to Singapore via Malaysia. So I think we try to get a few of these things off the ground. It could encourage bigger efforts in future. The Digital Economy Framework Agreement, I think, is another thing that could actually work quite well. But I'm told that realistically, progress has been quite slow in that area. But if we make a big push on that, at least in this part of the new economy, we could create some momentum for integration. So those are the points I wanted to raise. So I think I'll just stop here and back to Bob.
Thank you, Manu, for this balanced assessment, highlighting remaining bottlenecks and also outlining the ways forward. And now we are moving to our second speaker, May En. So, May En, please go ahead.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Manu, for that super detailed and very historically laden observation of ASEAN. My name is May En. I am well. My title is on the screen, so you can have a look. What I have been doing over the last 20 years of my life is actually been an ASEAN observer, and a lot of my work within the consulting firm has been around monitoring and evaluation of different types of frameworks. And one of the frameworks which I have been doing a lot of evaluation on is actually as an ICT master plan, as well as other master plans. So this question of is it fit for purpose, is actually quite close to my heart, because a lot of times, somewhere around the mid of the project, there's always a request, excuse me, can we get somebody to do a midterm evaluation to see how well we're going through? Are we on track to complete the work? Are we not on track to complete the work, etc.? So it's good to see that we're looking at it right at the front of the ASEAN Economic Community Strategic Plan. Are we actually designing it the right way? So that's where I'm going to be coming from. I'm also going to be coming to it from slightly different from where Manu is coming from, with a lot of history behind it. I actually work quite a lot with younger researchers and younger teams, especially in the ASEAN Secretariat. So there are quite new joiners to the team. So they don't come with, I think they come with a little bit less baggage of last time it didn't work and we are very tired of the same thing over and over again. So I'm still a little bit more positive, because I like to see the younger generation coming up and just seeing, hey, actually we still can make a difference. That these are the new challenges. So let's go ahead and do something to make our lives better. So it's always very nice to see a little bit more positive plan. So in the first instance, we want to be looking at the ASEAN aspiration, right? The ASEAN aspiration 2045 want to be the fourth largest economy in the world. So now I've got some statistics up here which actually show you the 10 largest economies in the world 2024 per GDP. And this is just nominal GDP for those of you statisticians out there. Don't kill me. It's nominal GDP. 27.9 trillion from the US, China 18.5 trillion. And you've got, basically you go down the list, right? So we're looking at the fourth largest economy, right? So the fourth largest economy here is what? Is Japan. Okay, very good. Everybody recognizes the flag. I tried testing this on my brother, and he's like, why you make me learn all of the flags? Very difficult. So Japan with $4.29 trillion, right? So this is ASEAN's economy. I apologize. This is a screenshot from a YouTube video, but you can see altogether, I've summed it up on the bottom left. It's about $4 trillion as of 2023. So maybe we're looking quite good-ish. I know trillions is a lot of money, so I'm not saying that it's a small amount, even if we're like 5 or 6. But my question is that, hold on, maybe fourth largest economy, are we shooting too low, perhaps? Are we shooting too high? I'm not too sure. So this is a question that I have for people, because one of the things which the speakers, when we were having a pre-meeting just now, we were talking about is, we were asking, how come they didn't do like a pre-assessment of where we were already? I mean, where did these goals come from in the first instance, right? So this is something which I put together, just back of envelope calculations. We're sort of like number 4, number 5-ish already. So maybe we're shooting a little bit too low. Not too sure. Happy to discuss with you whether or not trillions is a small or a big number in the first instance. So these are the aspirations. We want to get to the fourth largest economy. What is the trajectory right now? So you've got GDP ratios here. And for those of you like me, not economists, higher ratios here will show a strong focus on investment, driver of economic growth and development opportunities. So you can see, strangely, Myanmar is right on top. We've got Vietnam, Brunei, Indonesia, etc. So we've got a whole bunch of people, but it looks like pretty strong investment ratios. And you've got also, on the other side, GDP growth of ASEAN member states. In terms of percentage. So it looks like pretty strong growth is being expected. Now, I do again need to qualify that these figures, as well as these figures, are pre-US tariffs. So a lot of the investment might have gone down. I think that a lot of people don't actually have recent figures for confidence levels, for example. So it's really a little bit difficult. But again, we use the data that we have. So it looks like we're actually on quite a good trajectory in terms of our aspirations to get to this, fourth largest economy in 2045. Then we hit the strategic plan, and this is where I'm going to take a quote from Barbara, because she said, and how many of you have actually read the plan? Not too sure, right? Guys, it is a plan. Looks very nice. AEC strategic goals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hey, quite doable. Guess what? It breaks down into 44 objectives. It looks like this. Okay? Not just that. Each of the objectives breaks down into 192 strategic measures. I kid you not, as somebody who has been doing monitoring and evaluation, this is an absolute nightmare to be monitoring in the first instance. But it's not just about the monitoring, but rather it's also around the coordination. I know the text is really, really small, that you can't see it. But again, one of the things which all of the panelists were talking about when we were having this pre-meeting was that, hey, so there's actually something about currency and payments, and they also want to do things on infrastructure, and there's also sustainability and carbon credits inside. Like, okay, hold on. Let me map out how the ASEAN Secretariat works. And let's all look at maybe how each of the countries work, right? So from a Singapore perspective, if you have, for example, Ministry of Trade and Industry doing one particular thing, so you have the ministers meeting for the ministers of trade and investment. So that's one meeting. And they're in charge of foreign direct investment into the country. So that's one. But then you've got the environment ministers in the environment meeting there. But hold on, they're all part of the ASEAN Economic Community plan, the strategic plan. Now, it's hard enough, it's difficult enough, I think, to actually coordinate even within a single country, the independent meetings between these ministers. How much more complex is it going to be for countries to be coordinating on an ASEAN level to put this plan together? So that's the first point that I have for all of us, just in terms of observation of it, is it fit for purpose? Number one, I want to be positive about this, okay? I think it's a good thing that it is complex, because we are part of an environment right now where we are facing a really complex future. Who would have thought that suddenly everybody by the Q1 of 2025 would be an expert in tariffs? Go and ask any of the uncle, aunties sitting at the coffee shop. Suddenly they're all experts in tariffs. No economics degree, but everybody's an expert in tariffs. We did not expect that. I feel that the complexity of the plan is a good thing. Obviously, the complexity of the plan is also going to be a bad thing, because it's going to be, like I mentioned, really, really difficult to be coordinating to get all of that information. So that is a really difficult thing. So that's the first thing. It's wide-ranging, it's multidisciplinary, it's good, and yet it's bad. The second thing is to note is, and this is not immediately clear from the slides, but the previous AEC plan was actually 10 years. For 10 years. This new plan is actually for 5 years. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I think it's a good thing, because we can't have a 10-year plan anymore. These days, we can't do the 10-year plans because we need to change it quickly. So that's the second thing I want to say. Good job, ASEAN. I think that a 5-year plan better than a 10-year plan. The third thing is the level of detail. It's actually really, really important for this level of detail. I know that I'm really nervous about the fact that there's 44 objectives up here, 192 strategic measures. But again, I feel that complexity it will if we do proper reporting. If we do proper reporting, if we do proper accountability, it's actually going to be working to our benefit. And this is a very big if we are honest with ourselves, whether or not certain things are working or not. One of the things which I always joke about, the work that I do, sometimes we actually need to tweak the changes a bit, the goals a little bit. So the midterm reviews that I've done, for example, when I say, oh, okay, maybe this goal, we haven't even started yet, or maybe we've started, but it's only 10%. The suggestion during the midterm review is always going to be, would you like to revise the goals to be able to achieve it? So we change the goalposts a little bit. Again, is it good? Is it bad? It's actually important to, I think where Manu was saying, where we want to get small successes. I think success breeds success. So if we have small little micro wins, I feel it's good. So I don't think it's too cheap two cheetah bugs, as what they say, to change some of that. To change some of those goalposts. The final point that I will bring forward is actually this idea of looking forward. I think that when we look forward, the challenge that we face right now is that there are always uncertainties. But the uncertainties will breed challenges, but will also breed certain opportunities. So the three T's that I have for us to consider, and I don't have an answer for us, but it's really for us to consider. The first T is obviously the tariffs, what's going to happen. We've already seen the news recently because of the definite deadline of the tariffs at the end of the month. All of the ASEAN ministers will be meeting in Kuala Lumpur to be discussing what's going to happen when the tariffs actually kick in. So that's number one. The second interesting thing is I'm just about to take a trip to East Timor, and we don't really know what the introduction, if at all, if Timor is actually going to be acceded into ASEAN as the 11th ASEAN member state. What's going to happen? It's going to be good? Is it going to be bad? If you guys have not been to Timor, it might be a nice time to visit. We actually are very blessed in Singapore. We do have direct flights to Timor, so there's no hop or anything. 4 hours, just head over, have a quick look at the economy and the people there. It's a fantastic land. So that's the second T, that is a sort of like uncertainty. And the third is time. I think that there are a lot of black swan events that are happening that we really, really did not expect. Again, the tariffs are a great example of this. We did not expect, for example, a couple of years ago, we did not expect COVID as well. That time is just super duper turbulent, and we are simply not going to be able to plan for any of this, which is why, again, I'm going to come back to the massive number of objectives that are on the screen right now. I think that I like the fact that it's complex because it means that there is space to make progress if we're not going to be able to make progress on some other arena. So it gives a little bit more space to play around with. There are 5 years. Again, I'm looking forward. I am fairly optimistic, which I think will be a little bit different from some of the panelists on on the table, but happy to be discussing with everybody when we have Q&A. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, May Ann, for your thought-provoking and optimistic presentation. And now we move on to Jose. The floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Dennis and also to the Center for Asia and Globalizations for inviting me here to discuss about one of my interests, actually, the ASEAN integrations. Manu has give important insight, interesting insight from the private sector perspective. And thanks to May, I become more optimistic right now about the ASEAN integrations. Allow me to give 4 points to you during my talk this evening. First, following up to May Ann's optimistic tone on the coverage and also the ambitions of ASEAN's strategic plan, new strategic plans. I think we have also to look at it. There are 44 objectives and 192 measures. It is complex and we require this complexity, but I believe we also need to prioritize. The ASEAN needs to prioritize. Why? Because all of these measures are quite costly and require resources. Yeah. Take, for example, sustainability or resilience. They are very nice words. These regions might need it, might need sustainability and need also to have economic resilience, but they don't come cheap. Sustainability means that we have to transitions from our way of productions. We also need to have new energy resources. Resilience on the resilience, we also need to change our perspective also from the private sector. Private sector normally only look at the efficiency, but now they also need to look at resilience. And resilience doesn't come cheap either. So what kind of sustainability, what measures of the sustainability that we need to prioritize, what measures of resilience that we need to do at the first base, because what kind of things that we need provide us with greater multiplier effects. I don't think the strategic plans already discussed about it. That this is the homework of ASEAN to choose and where to have the prioritizations on those kind of 192 measures or 44 objectives. That's my first point. My second point is actually on the institutional infrastructure to carry out all of the strategic plan. Unfortunately, ASEAN do not really have this institutional infrastructure, at least until now. We have discussed about how to reform ASEAN and improve the capacity of ASEAN in order to carry out all those kind of initiatives since decades ago. But unfortunately, the progress of improving the capacity and the institutional infrastructures remain to be very limited, because ASEAN operates with very minimum resources. The secretariat, for example, only has like around over 200 persons to carry out all of those measures. Not on this is only, we're only talking about economic community. There are also social security community. There is also another one is a social and cultural community. And there is a new ones of connectivity pillars as well. So all of this cannot be carried out only by a secretariat. And the secretariat also do not have authority for that. So ASEAN basically works with the decentralized systems. There are many sectoral ministerial bodies. There are many committees, and then those. There is a ASEAN Economic Councils. Normally, minister oversee the process. This decentralized implementation structure can be cumbersome and often inconsistent from one to another, especially because they normally work in silo, only care about what they try to do, what they're going to have. There are calls to have greater coordination and monitoring, but again, this will require a stronger capacity and perhaps improve the roles of the secretariat as well. Another institutional issue is the decision-making process, that basically works on consensus basis and intergovernmental. So everything have to be agreed by all 10 state members. They must agree for major steps and cannot be done if one country hesitant to do so. For example, we know that the importance and of regulatory harmonization, for example. It's one of the objective, if I'm not mistaken, it's 1.8 in your list of 44 objectives. But if one country do not agree about how we how ASEAN conduct regulatory harmonizations, then they're gonna leave it alone. They're not going to proceed with these plans. There is also this ASEAN's the so-called ASEAN minus X mechanism, where it's supposed to have only certain country. If a certain number of countries agree, then they can proceed. But this is rarely used. Why they are rarely used? Because in order to agree for ASEAN minus X mechanism, you have to get consensus first. So you are trapped into unsupportive decision-making process. My third point is related to how fit the strategic plan to the current global economic dynamics, and how to strengthen ASEAN centrality. the strategic plan has one specific goal: global ASEAN, by boosting regional integration and self-reliance, also promoting open regionalism. But I believe there are a lot of things that ASEAN need to do, especially ASEAN has one platforms that can become a strategic platform to respond to to the current situations, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. This is the biggest trade agreements in the world. But it seems that ASEAN's already lost interest to RCEP. And if you look at the statistic of RCEP, there's not much not much progress actually since the last 3 years it was concluded. So it comes to my last point. It is on the political willingness and leadership. The political willingness, political will seems to sound cliche, but I think this is still very important, because you cannot solve political problems with technical solutions, at least not entirely. Yeah, like for examples on the non-tariff barriers in ASEAN, the political will is not there. Well, ASEAN try to complement it with transparency. ASEAN try to complement it with dispute mechanism, dispute settlement mechanisms. But all of them did not really work because the political will is not there. So, but I'm quite optimistic with the current. In order to strengthen the political will, we need leadership. That's what we lack actually so far. The leadership of ASEAN that can bring ASEAN to the higher level. But I'm quite optimistic to close it with an optimistic tone again. I'm quite optimistic with the current leadership of ASEAN member countries. At least, like for my from my country, we have President Prabowo who's also interested in ASEAN's. Also, Prime Minister Lawrence Wong here, who already travels around ASEAN's, and Prime Minister Anwar, and they also have a good connection from with one another, and hopefully those new leadership of ASEAN might bring ASEAN might bring ASEAN to the higher levels, and then direct the ASEAN toward all the goals that they have tried to achieve. Thank you very much. We're happy to discuss it further.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for your very resilient presentation. Because, yeah, my apologies, the drilling wasn't planned, but it also shows even the school has coordination challenges. Hopefully,
It needs coordination.
hopefully it will stop. There is some repainting being done. So thank you so much. And now I'll give the floor to Dennis.
Okay, thank you. There's been a lot of points already covered by our three panel speakers, but maybe I'd like to just share some observations I made. I just attended an ASEAN meeting about 2 weeks ago, where the plan is for the ASEAN Secretariat to socialize the new strategic plan. So the audience were think tanks, NGOs, as well as some of the development partners. I mean, if the document, by the way, is free there. We can just download that document right now. And if you look at it in detail, it's a pretty, I would call it a beautiful document. Everything that you can think of is there, whether it's in sustainability, climate change, technology, it's all there. And it tells you what needs to be done to fix everything so that we become a great economic community. And the ASEAN Economic Community is not a new idea. If you go back, I think it came out in the ASEAN Concord 2 way back in 2003, and there's been 2 blueprints, right? The one that's ending now is the second blueprint, 2015 to 2025. So what I found really strange in that meeting was that they never really talked about the final assessment. What has been achieved from that 10-year blueprint, which ends this year, and what not has been achieved. So you got these 44 objectives, you've got 194 different kinds of measures. What was carried forward from the existing blueprint? We want to know what has been done, what has been achieved, and what has been unfinished. What are the unfinished work that's been done on that blueprint that's been carried forward to this new one? So for all you know, that 144 measures are all from the old blueprint that's been brought forward. We don't know until we see the final assessment. And I've been told that it will come true. I mean, that final assessment will be, I think, launched sometime in, I'm assuming at the second summit, which is sometime later in the year, in November. The other point that they did mention is that, I mean, if you look at that document, it looks very aspirational. It's very broad, it's very strategic. It doesn't really translate to anything that's actionable. It tells you what needs to be done. It doesn't tell you how it's going to be done, right? And I've been told that that will come out eventually. Those very detailed action plans for those 6 different strategic goals and objectives will come out by the very different types of sectoral bodies. With SME working group, ASEAN has a lot of different working groups, and that will all come out soon. And we'll have to wait and see, right? And also some observations there. They had a panel of speakers too, like this. It was a mixed bag. They had different people from NGOs, there was one academic, there were people from the private sector. They also had some policymakers from different governments there to give different views on it. Some of them were more interesting or more useful than others. I think there were views from the private sector. I think from the ASEAN Business Advisory Group were. And it was quite similar usual problems, right? It's like it's kind of a laundry list of things that they want ASEAN to do, including things like lack of engagement by the private sector. They want to be more involved in ASEAN initiatives from the beginning, but particularly from project conception, rather at the end, or not even being aware that there's a new ASEAN initiatives that maybe the private sector could have been involved in earlier on and could have provided much valuable inputs. This lack of engagement, lack of sometimes transparency, the word was used. Some discussions on maybe we should do sandboxes, pilot projects, and move forward with that first, and then eventually, if it takes off, it's great. It becomes a new ASEAN initiative. So those were some of them. But I've heard all this before, and some of you follow ASEAN, like Manu. You know that these are not new problems and new issues, right? A lot of discussions on micro, small, medium enterprises. Again, not very new. I mean, how can we get them access to global markets? The usual problems about them getting access to capital. What needs to be done? I think the sectorial body for SMEs is quite active, but again, very, very similar problems that were raised. Some of the policymakers, which I used to work very closely with policymakers in my old job in APAC. The same thing. It's a very top-down sort of mindset. Oh, let's come up with a new blueprint, or let's come up with a new strategic plan. I think ASEAN has enough of these kind of plans. The challenge is, how do we implement them? And it was brought up too. I mean, it's not about the plan itself. It's what can we implement effectively. I think that's one of the things that was brought up. So it seems to me, from my impression at that meeting, was that the new strategic plan was kind of a reset, right? We need to do all these things, because we're living in a very challenging environment now, right? And I think that's where the disconnect is. The moderator for the panel raised a very important question there, which I don't believe any of the panelists really answered it properly or well enough, is how should ASEAN recalibrate its policies to adjust to this changing environment? We know that we're living in a very much more hostile economic environment. We talked about the kind of reciprocal tariffs that the US is imposing, or this increased tensions between US and China. So how is ASEAN doing something? What is ASEAN doing? How is it trying to adjust its policies to basically to remain relevant and to remain competitive in this environment? And it's not very clear. I don't think anyone really was able to answer. Maybe because they don't know how, right? At the national level, we do know, particularly when it comes to trade policies, they are trying to adjust. They are trying to recalibrate their policies through all these discussions and trade deals that's going on, which hasn't worked to some extent so far, right? So at the national level, they are trying to recalibrate because of the nature of these tariffs. It's very transactional. It's done, between, it's bilateral really between the U.S. and the various countries that are affected by these reciprocal tariffs. And that's a challenge for ASEAN, right? ASEAN really, I mean, this has been discussed in different seminars. ASEAN doesn't really want to choose a side. U.S. and China are two very important markets for ASEAN. U.S. companies have a long presence here, but we also know that China is a big market, and our global supply chains are very much linked to these two countries. At the same time, we do know that this rise in trade protection is one of the many reasons. It's not very clear to me why President Trump is raising these tariffs. And it's not just at the country level, but it's also at sectoral level, right? Raising tariffs on copper, raising pharmaceuticals, I think is the other one, aluminum, is because it's trying to decouple its supply chains from China, right? And the question is, how should ASEAN position itself? Because it's really very much plugged into these two superpowers, and its supply chains are linked to these two. It doesn't really want to choose a side. So those are the kind of questions that should be raised and are probably being discussed maybe offline by some of the ASEAN leaders. But it should also be addressed somehow in the strategic plan, because it's not business as usual, honestly, right? The sense I'm getting, it's still very business as usual. Everything is very rosy, but it isn't, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not. I'm a believer in ASEAN. It's just that we need. I think policymakers need to recognize that it's not the same anymore. The rules of the game, if there's any rules left, has changed so much. The global economic order is in disarray, right? And we need to find ways to adjust to this changing environment. So what does ASEAN need to do? I think that's one of the questions that needs to be raised. I feel that we do need to step down. We need to step up when it comes to economic integration, but we need to find new and even radical ways in trying to do that, right? Jose talked about the consensus driven initiatives mechanism for ASEAN initiatives to move forward. In many ways, it slows down the process, and so why don't we be radical about this? And maybe we need to move away from consensus, right? Maybe we need to move towards something like majority voting, right? Or the way the WTO works now is that it's also based on consensus, but there's a move towards more plurilateral agreements, right? Rather than all 160 member countries have to agree on that. APEC, where I used to work, has something called the Pathfinder approach, right? Where you don't need all the countries to come together to move forward a new project. A couple of you can do it, right? So why can't ASEAN think more? They need to think out of the box, to be honest. Things are not the same anymore. So what else can we do? Manu talked about what's doable. What are some of the integration projects that we can do that's doable? Whether it's, I think the QR code one it's been moving, it's been progressing, and some countries have already started to do that, right? It's part of digital payments. But what are the other small projects that are doable? Let's move forward with them rather than have this grand scheme, which we want to know, right? How much of that is workable? So I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. So thank you all for your insightful presentations. And before I open the floor to our audience, I have just one specific question to each of you. So I'll start with Manu. So given your experience in strategic advisory work across Asia, how do you assess the strategic plan's capacity to mobilize new sources of competitiveness for ASEAN in the face of global supply chain restructuring and trade protectionism? Because the plan mentions new sources of competitiveness, but it might sound a bit abstract, or how is it, how realistic it is? And so you can think about it, and then I'll come back to you. Then, May Ann, my question to you is, the strategic plan emphasizes building secure and resilient digital infrastructure. So how would you define resilience in this case? And what are the primary challenges you see ASEAN faces in achieving this goal? And what specific measures would you recommend to address cybersecurity and data governance concerns? Then my question to Jose, you mentioned lack of political will and some capacity concerns. So my question to you is, from your perspective, in terms of reforms, what should be done to improve or increase the role and capacity of the ASEAN Secretariat? If you have some concrete suggestions. And to Dennis, so the strategic plan emphasizes robust monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. There is a section on that at the end. And so from your perspective, what specific indicators and assessment frameworks would you recommend to ensure accountability and to track meaningful progress? Because you express your concern that we don't really know, right, what is new and what have we done. So how can we actually track this? Okay, thank you. So Manu?
Thank you. So thank you. I actually like this question because I just did some work on this. Yeah. So I mean, I think competitiveness is not anymore a case of low wage costs or very good infrastructure. It goes beyond that. And if you look at why Chinese exports to so many new markets, new products are surging, it's to do with cost competitiveness as well as quality, as well as an innovation edge. So how do you look at these things? I mean, one thing I look at now in terms of competitiveness would be the premium return on foreign investment, which can be calculated. China has a huge advantage there, but the good news for ASEAN actually is that over the last few years, our gap with China has narrowed. In one or two countries' cases, we now offer a premium return on foreign investment compared to China. So some things are going right, but this is at the individual country level. It's not an overall thing. The second thing I look at is the innovation efficiency. So you get all these innovation rankings, which tend to mix up innovation inputs and innovation outputs. So if you break it into the two and work out a ratio, the outcomes that you get as a result of a certain level of inputs, you get innovation efficiency. And there we are weak. Most countries in ASEAN are very, very weak. China excels. Singapore, surprisingly, is extremely weak. We get good rankings on innovation mainly because we are masters at mobilizing resources. But when you look at the actual outcomes from those resources and relate the two, it's not very efficient. So we need to tackle that if we want to get real. And this innovation capacity is not just for the more advanced members of ASEAN. It's really even for the poorer countries because innovation is becoming more important as a source of competitiveness. The final element, which I think is really important, and that's the lesson from China's success, is agglomeration effects. China has succeeded because it's got these great agglomerations. You've got the Greater Bay Area, you've got the Shanghai, Yangtze Delta area. And what do you have there? You have so many companies competing to provide inputs, whether intermediate goods or logistical services, that you get tremendous cost efficiencies. Also, not just cost efficiencies, they also compete on quality. And that is what is making China really competitive. Now, again, ASEAN is not bad. We have clusters of competitive manufacturing activities, the Eastern Economic Corridor of Thailand, the Penang Kulim corridor, northern part of the Malay Peninsula, the Iskandar region, including Singapore, and the industrial conurbations around Jakarta. But it's not enough. It doesn't have enough scale to compete with China, and it needs to be broadened out and strengthened. And this is where I think top-down intervention is needed. You need heavy investment in infrastructure and connectivity. The Thais are trying to do that with the Eastern Economic Corridor, but they seem to find it difficult to actually implement these plans. More needs to be done there. And huge investment in education, not just basic education, but education and retraining for mid-career workers who will be displaced by technology and so on. So I think a lot more needs to be done. But the good news is there are elements where ASEAN countries individually are doing well. But I think if we try to do it collectively, it might be more effective. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Manu, for your comprehensive answer. May Anne, over to you.
All right, for those of you who are feeling the effects of being sick something already, the question was really around digital and secure and resilient digital infrastructure. Now, I deal a lot with the technology bits and pieces. In fact, a lot of my ASEAN work just sits within the Digi-Min sector. So I'm happy to answer this question. I think I need to break it up in the first instance to individual country responsibility for their own infrastructure and what we are concerned about within the context of this particular session, which is around the AEC itself, which is we want to talk about the digital infrastructures that are going to be employed with regard to trade, so that we don't boil the ocean. Okay, if not, I can talk about like, oh, you need to secure your computer, etc. It's just like too much stuff already. Okay, so in the first instance, I want to say I'm going to give you case studies of where I think that ASEAN has actually done a slow but pretty steady job in making sure that we can share information within the ASEAN community safely and securely. The first one, I'm pretty sure nobody will remember, and this is passports and the ASEAN visa-free zone. A lot of people don't realize this, but it was a very long discussion from the ministers at that time. And mind you, this was pre everybody had a computer. We wanted to have an ASEAN visa-free zone to allow for free movement of trade, free movement of people, and therefore free movement of ideas, and therefore the market to exist. My goodness, guys, it was a painful thing. It's like, can you bring out your customs form? You remember the white color card for those of you who your white color card from Indonesia. Can you please bring it out? Okay. Number one, do you have first name? Oh, you don't say first name. You say given name. Okay, given name. So we need to equalize it. How many letters? Wait, sorry, this one is, if you have an Indian name, then you have to have a SO, right? Son of something. Oh, but then in Indonesia, there's some people with only the first name. So this means that the last name or the surname cannot be blank. Guys, that took a very long time, but it was one of the ways I feel in which the starting of that secure and resilient infrastructure started, because it was agreed there would be 20 fields at that point in time. This was like the 1980s. 20 fields that all ASEAN member states would have on their form, and it could be interchanged however that you wanted. Like whatever the case you want to do with other fields, that's fine, but you must have these 20 fields. And that allowed, at that point in time, and a lot of people didn't realize this, the white color card to actually have an ASEAN logo on it. So that's one success case study already, I feel, that moved us into that space where we needed to ensure that data could be interchangeable. So that's one case study. The second case study, a little bit more recent, which is the QR code payments, which we've mentioned before. I will give you the official name for it. It's real-time payments, RTP. The idea is that you can transfer money using things like, in Singapore, it's nets, but what has happened is that we understand it as QR code payments. Thailand, Prompt Pay. Malaysia, Do It Now, and Singapore's SG payments as QR codes. Those are the ones that now allow for real-time payments, RTP. And that took some discussion. We're still working it out. But again, this has got to do with technology and the idea of resilient payments, because the central banks need to coordinate and talk to each other. So I think that that's a success story in and of itself. So I want to park all of that there. The third example that I will put on the table is which is a little bit harder to understand. It's actually the Trade Trust Initiative, which is around blockchain technologies being used for customs and bills of lading for shipments coming in and out. Now, moving on to blockchain means that, the usual bits in blockchain about everybody can verify it, it's publicly available, etc., etc. I won't belabor the point, but the idea is that I think the ASEAN single window has started to do that engagement with that particular standard, and this is the key, I feel, for secure infrastructure for trade. The use of international standards and the pulling up of all of the ASEAN states onto these types of international standard type of platforms so that further growth can happen. I'll dive a little bit deeper into the Trade Trust Initiative, because it uses blockchain in the first instance. So transparency, very good, everybody loves it. But the important thing is that it adheres to the e-PEPL standards for information exchange when it comes to customs and things like bills of lading. This means that transactions can occur and can be done with other countries outside of ASEAN, which means that once you are able to connect into the ASEAN single window, you can trade anywhere in the world with this standard. And I think that that is the key to the idea of a secure and resilient ASEAN, a secure and resilient digital infrastructure. Again, I don't want to boil the ocean, but let's just look at the techniques and the platforms that we as ASEAN will need to ensure that trade happens. And I feel that these are some examples of where I feel ASEAN has done pretty well. And I think that using international standards to push forward we can actually move a little bit further. I think that there's still obviously some ways to go, because can you imagine after so many years we only have like 3 good examples that I can bring up. I think that we need to move a little bit faster, but I think that I feel that we can definitely look to them and say, hey, actually there are good examples and we should be pressing on.
Okay, thank you so much, Mei Ann, for these great illustrations of security and resilience in digital infrastructure. And now, Jose, you can please share your answer.
Okay, on the ASEAN Secretariat, I think there are quite many proposals, but one thing that ASEAN members need to do in order to not only to strengthen the ASEAN Secretariat, but also to strengthen ASEAN institutions in general, is that to put more resources into ASEAN program. Like I'm not really sure the current budget of ASEAN, but perhaps around 30 to 35 million dollar per year. Yeah, but most of them is only for the operations of secretariat. If you look at some of ASEAN development, ASEAN have many cooperation programs in connectivity programs, in digital programs, in many other programs. But most of them are financed by external partners. ASEAN members do not really put resources, do not really put their contributions to their own development program, their own cooperation program. So basically, first, if we want to strengthen our ASEAN institution, including the Secretariat, put more money into it, put more resources. So do not just produce this document, but also put more money into it. Yeah, that's one thing. On the secretariat itself, I think we need. There are so quite many things that the secretariat can do. But one thing for sure is to provide monitoring and evaluations. Monitoring and evaluations that do not only come at the ends of programs, but rather quite regular. Like for examples, the ASEAN Economic Community. In the first stage of ASEAN Economic Community, actually there is always every year there is a scorecard for the implementations of this economic community initiative. So every year there is a scorecard, or although the scorecard never really been published, but at least for ASEAN members, they know what the current stage of the implementation. But right now, I think the monitoring and evaluations only done every 5 years. So again, ASEAN Secretariat can provide more robust monitoring and evaluation programs if they do have capacity and they do have resources to do so.
Thank you so much, Jose. Dennis, what are your thoughts?
Okay. I forgot one more point during my presentation, which is no, I'm going to just shamelessly promote this publication I did with it's something I did edited with Julia Tijaja last year, where we try to look at some recommendations. There's some free copies here, but it's also we can download it from the website, and we brought together, it's kind of a labor of love, some key practitioners and experts looking at different areas of the ASEAN Economic Community, and you know, we've just put down, it's a very short description of some of the key policy recommendations we think are important. And one of them is about monitoring and evaluation. So the question you brought up, and also you also brought up the point about more resources. So there is actually an ASEAN framework for monitoring and evaluation, which I think came out this year. And I won't go into too much details, but I think it does talk about how the Secretariat needs to work closer together with national governments in the implementation of various ASEAN commitments, and in the need for certain kinds of feedback tools as well from the stakeholders, right? Whether it's whichever agreement, it could be on trade, it could be on some of these agreements, of course, are legally binding. One of the big issues, of course, in ASEAN is that it does have a dispute settlement mechanism. It's never been used. So although you have legally binding agreements like the ASEAN Trade and Goods Agreement and others, compliance is an issue because, you know, they never use the dispute settlement mechanism if any particular member state doesn't comply. So that's why monitoring evaluation does become very important. But the ASEAN Secretariat does have very limited resources. It does have a unit for NME, but it's not enough. It can't monitor every single agreement with so many member states. So that's why there needs to be a closer collaboration and cooperation with national governments and various agencies within these governments to determine whether the various ASEAN agreements are actually being followed or complied. So it's not just a question of converting these into national legislation, is whether you actually are implementing it and whether countries are actually complying. So that is still a work in progress, because that framework is a very comprehensive framework. It's just come out. So again, perhaps as what Jose said, maybe that's where if member states are going to increase their financial contributions to the Secretariat, that's one area I think that will be quite crucial for them to boost up if they want, particularly the AEC to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. So now we would like to open the floor to questions from our audience. So you can just raise your hand, and before you ask the question, please introduce yourself, and then you can use the microphone in front of you so we can hear you. Yes, at the back, please.
Okay. Hi. My name is Hazrel. I'm from FTI Consulting. So I think recently Nazir Razak, the chairman of the Malaysian BAC, had pointed out that apparently there are more than 9,000 non-tariff barriers being reported on a single ASEAN platform, and it's gotten to the point where businesses have stopped reporting issues with NTBs because they believe that they cannot be addressed. Based on your engagements and your and what you've seen, I mean, what's the problem with addressing these NTBs? I mean, to the point that they've become so rampant, is it political will? Because obviously, now there's, the rhetoric is always the need for economic integration, ASEAN unity. I think we've heard it over and over again from the Malaysian Prime Minister this year as ASEAN chair. But if these issues are resolved, then clearly there's a gap. So just curious to get your insights on this, because it seems very important, and it seems that nothing's moving on this front.
Thank you so much for your question. So yeah, this is definitely a recurring issue. We can collect a few more questions, one or two. Anybody? Yes, please, over there.
Hi, can you hear me? Ignatius from Shell. I have a question around leadership, which was mentioned by one of the panelists earlier. So I think Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has said something that ASEAN need bold reform, right? So given that Singapore is going to be the chair in 2027, anyone, all the panelists, any take on that? That would there be any significant reform coming out from a chairmanship, Singapore chairmanship? And if that's so, what would that be? I'm speaking from the practitioner perspective. When you look at the region, we look at carbon capture, we look at, we look at carbon credit, we look at Asia, ASEAN power grid. It's difficult to see it as an ASEAN project, to be very frank. At best, it's a bilateral project. And how do we break that deadlock in terms of having really something at the policy level where they can continue to integrate rather than going on its own? So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a very interesting question. Yes, next to the window, please.
Okay. Oh, sorry. All right. Thank you, the panels. My name's Calvin. So I think it's great presentation. So I have a few questions for three areas. I think throughout the strategic plans and all, it seems that to me, there's a few things that is occurring, whether how practical all these plans are, right? So when we talk about executions, beside the different standards that all the ASEAN countries have, let's say we just talk about Singapore itself. So when we have these meetings, all the ministers and all that, so when they bring it back, who will be responsible to execute the plan? Like just now, May talk about it, right? Coordinations between different ministries and all that. So how is that going to work? Let's just say Singapore as an example. The other one, I think you also brought it a very good example in terms of the standard, fixing the standards. I think if we take away all the beautiful plans and all that, I think this is fundamentally one of the very critical things that ASEAN has to address in terms of fixing the standard, because without standards, everybody just have their own things to do. And there are different levels in terms of economic levels, technology levels among the ASEAN countries. So if this is fundamentally when we fix the standard problems, the standardizations issues, then a lot of things can probably move faster. So will there be any way that we can get them to move and talk about this? And the third thing is about accountability. And I think this is from experience. I mean, since young, I've been hearing probably the same things. Like we've been hearing about the CO2 emissions for the longest time, right? But there's very little things progress on that. So when it comes to accountability, so what are the things that we can actually check on them in terms of progress? Because these are like happy meetings among all the ASEAN members, right? But in terms of like the information to the public is very limited. We can probably see from the official published from the website and all that there's very little for us to question that what has been done, and even some of their countries, they also not so sure about that, right? So in the plan, I noticed that they mentioned about this thing called the social safety mechanisms and all that. But when we look at the actual events happen in Myanmar, like this year, they had some discussions, but we can't really hold them accountable because different policy, and this is kind of like their civil problems. When we look at one of the plans, I think they said about provide shelters for calamities, for vulnerabilities, marginalized community. We think about Rohingya peoples, those are the actual issues that we are facing. So how can ASEAN better address this, thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting these important practical issues as well. So maybe let's answer these three questions first, and then if you still have some questions, we can try to do another round. So the first question on non-tariff barriers. Any of the speakers would like to answer this question?
Yeah, I think the reduction of tariffs is basically the low-hanging fruit. The biggest challenge, not just for ASEAN, but also at other organizations, including WTO, is addressing non-tariff. These are basically barriers behind the border. It could be regulations, it could be different types of things, and that's where the challenge is. It's partly political, partly lack of transparency. I think in ASEAN there is a list of different kinds of NTBs that's listed there, but not everything. You don't have to disclose all these different NTBs, and that's why it's also brought up by the private sector because hey, I'm doing business. I want to bring, I want to sell something from say Malaysia to Vietnam. Suddenly, I hit all these regulations that I need to comply, and trying to find ways to address that is an ongoing process, and that's not the low hanging fruit. So that's something that's still being discussed and probably should be reflected. I think they talk about non-tariff barriers. But what I want to know is what have they addressed so far, right? They've been talking about non-tariff barriers for the longest time because tariffs are literally almost zero for most of ASEAN products. So what are the NTBs that they're trying to address? Please note there's a difference between NTBs and non-tariff measures. So non-tariff measures are more legitimate. They could be for different reasons, from public safety and other things. But it's a non-tariff barrier. It's a kind of regulations which are really trade barriers that we want to identify and try to address. And I would just say that's an ongoing challenge. That's why, I always like to say, I always like to give this example, right? I drink a lot of coffee, right? And I live in different ASEAN countries. My wife is Philippines. We have great coffee there. Indonesia. Do you see all this coffee in your local supermarket here or even in Malaysia, others? You don't see. You only see coffee. Most of the coffee is either from Brazil or some other countries. Why don't we see that? Or mangoes from different countries. So, what's going on, right? Is it because of partly maybe consumer demand? Maybe that's one of the reasons that they prefer Brazilian coffee. I don't know. But how much of it in other countries is because of barriers? We don't know. That's why I think, again, that's why they need to discuss these issues, right? I'll stop here. Maybe that's not the...
Anybody else would like to join? Yeah, Manu, please.
Let me give it a try. I think we cannot expect too much of ASEAN. ASEAN cannot but operate on a consensus basis because that's the nature of the organization. And given that there is no clear consensus on the hard trade-offs that are needed to promote integration, most countries have their own ambitions. They're not prepared to forgo those ambitions in order to achieve a greater good. There is no. So I think until you have that consensus, until you have a strong leadership in ASEAN that pushes certain things and knocks heads together and gets a consensus, honestly, I don't think we are going to get any progress on NTB barriers or other things. So we just have to accept that ASEAN is what it is and focus, as I mentioned earlier, on what is doable. In the 1980s, there was more leadership. Suharto, for instance, when it came to the Cambodian crisis, was prepared to forgo a certain degree of Indonesia's interest in maintaining a very good relationship. I think Ambassador Tan Yok Chor was involved in that. He knows a lot about this, right? He was prepared to forgo some of Indonesia's interest in order to have a collective ASEAN response. At that time, ASEAN was, of course, much smaller. And it worked. It actually worked. But that was the high point. We've not seen that kind of leadership ever since. So I think that's the hard reality.
Can I just add something before I pass on? To me, anyway, the most important thing, because of, whether we like it or not, global supply chains, global value chains are a very important part of the growth of this region. It's the trade issues which are the most important, right? So to me, addressing tariffs, addressing non-tariff barriers will be at least the most important thing. That you should prioritize for the AEC before even other things. Otherwise, it's going to be a challenge for you to build new supply chains or new value chains or to promote new industries which are drivers for the future, right? If you have these barriers. And I think that's also what May has talked about. Digital services, there are different kinds of barriers for digital services, right? Data localization, cross-border data flows. Again, and I found it interesting that DIFA is not mentioned. The digital economy framework is not even mentioned in the strategic plan. That's a question for me, the end to answer. Sorry.
Yeah, if I may add, I agree with Dennis that the pressure from economic activities such as global supply chains and digitalizations would put all those kind of those those non-tariff barriers becomes questionable in the domestic political interest. But sometimes political interest in the country at national levels is very strong because of the and they and combines with the myopic government perspective, these kind of barriers remain to be there and cost a lot to the economy, not only at the regional level but even at the national levels. So I think against perhaps we can find some technical ways to solve that kind of problems, but back in the end it's against back to the political will again.
Thank you. May end. There is a second question on Singapore's chairmanships in 2027, and the third question on responsibility to execute the plan.
So I'm gonna address all three questions actually. Thank you very much. Nazul, is it your name? Hazrul, and Ignatius, and from Calvin. I'm gonna address them in the first instance. I'm not an expert in non-tariff barriers. However, I think I know which department you're talking about. You are talking about the complaints department. Basically, your question is, how come nobody is addressing the complaints that all these people have been putting in because there are like so many non-tariff barriers? Well, I don't think anybody wants to be dealing with it. This is my non-expert opinion of it because it's just really difficult to be trying to untangle all of the challenges. So I don't have further for you. We're happy to chat with you after this also, but I really don't think that it's something which the ASEAN Secretariat has a lot of resources to put into to deal with people who are just unhappy with like the process. I mean, there's always going to be difficulties in the processes. So just park that. I like Ignatius' question because I just spent last weekend just calculating carbon credits because I'm actually doing a diploma in sustainability and environmentalism, Republic Polytechnic, and this semester we're like learning carbon credits, so I'm like dying under calculations. In terms of leadership, so let me just talk about leadership in the first instance. Will Singapore use its position as chairperson to rock the boat and perhaps slaughter a couple of sacred cows? I honestly don't think so. I think that it will be quite difficult. Can you imagine if they say, oh, Singapore want to propose that we will no longer have consensus mechanism? Wow, I think Singapore will be responsible for the absolute destruction or revolt of ASEAN. So I don't really think that that's something which I think Singapore is willing to put on the table. I don't think that we're in such a bad, dire state that we will need that kind of radical shift, but I think we're looking for radical solutions, I think, rather than a radical change in leadership. I think that is something which absolutely can be put on the table, but I don't see it happening. Also, one thing to note is pretty important in terms of the ASEAN governance structures. There is an ASEAN chairmanship. So you are the chair of ASEAN for that year. But each individual forum will have its own chair also. So it could be, for example, this year, Malaysia is chairing for the whole of ASEAN, but the finance ministers meeting is actually chaired by another country. And then the DIFA, well, I'm supposed to talk about DIFA, right? So the DigiMin is being chaired by another country. I think it's by Thailand this year. So it's actually not so simple just to say, want to change, and then we'll just be able to change it. So the governance structures are a little bit different as well. To your question around the ASEAN grid, because I think you mentioned that you're from Shell. I agree. It's actually interesting that we have to be making these arrangements for the ASEAN grid on a country-by-country bilateral basis. But I believe that it is simply the nature of business, because there will always be horse trading behind the scenes, right? If let's say I want to, as Singapore, I call Pak Jose and I'll be like, hey, we want to have an ASEAN grid, but then we want to connect first with Indonesia. And we know that you have a lot of renewable energy, you've got carbon sinks in peatlands, etc. So we want to be working together because not only do we want to create the ASEAN grid and the energy, I want to talk to you about carbon markets trading as well. Because again, carbon sinks exist there. I want to be able to create a carbon market where I can buy those carbon credits for you. So if that's the case, then I think it's going to be complicated and going to be for an interminable process if I want to try and get every single ASEAN state to be part of this agreement. I'd rather just talk to, Pak Jose first and be like, let's do Indonesia, Singapore first in the first instance. Now, I'm going to pause on that discussion because I think that it relates to Calvin's question around standards. And this is where Singapore leadership is relevant. Singapore likes to take the leadership in places where it can put first mover advantage to select the standards for different kinds of things. I'll give you one example. I'll give you one example in terms of the AI governance framework. Singapore saw that. Singapore put that on the table. Singapore said, hey, I know ASEAN Secretariat has no resources, no money. I will fund it. I will put IMDA behind it. Why? Because I want to control it. Not control it in a really nefarious sense, but I want to be able to say, I feel that these frameworks and these standards should be put in place. So if I were to be putting, for example, first mover advantage again in the ASEAN grid, then I'd be like, okay, this is how many megawatts capacity for the cable that I'm going to be running, a submarine cable, to be between Singapore and Laos, to be Singapore and Cambodia. And then you put in the frameworks by which you can see, okay, in terms of the total transmission, amount of transmissions that I want to be exchanging, it's like this. But at the same time, I'm also talking about renewables. I'm also talking about carbon markets. And then you have what standards is one word. The other word I will use is template. A template for a bilateral agreement with another country. In which case, then people will be like, okay, it's not so difficult. And this is the power of ASEAN, because I think that one of your questions was like, oh, if it's all bilateral, then what's the point of ASEAN? I think that then this kicks in this idea of, if it's an ASEAN agreement, then can we, I won't say photocopy, but can we just copy and then can we amend it? And can we just say, hey, maybe Malaysia and Cambodia want to have this arrangement as well. We can, this thing that Singapore had with Indonesia looks good, but I think we want to change it and you can make it your own. I think it's useful to have a template. And therefore, that those standards, from a Singapore perspective, you get to choose those standards. And then from an ASEAN perspective, you have a template for an ASEAN agreement, even though it's bilateral, that people can follow. And it makes it a little bit less alien. And this is where, again, I come back to where Manu was saying, where success will breed success. You see other countries do it, like, actually can lah. Anyway, we got the ASEAN brand name, so we are also ASEAN, so we can also do it together. So I feel that that's something which we are working our way towards. I do see it happening, that virtuous cycle and the templates that are happening. So I don't feel that it is something which is too out of range, but that's again where the power of standards and that's where the power of ASEAN does come in. I hope I've answered the questions. Thank you for your time.
I think you had one more question about who executes these agreements, right? So the thing is, right, all these different kinds of, it's 194 initiatives and they actually get drilled down to different sectorial bodies, okay? So it could be transportation, it could be energy. So, and they're represented by different ministries. And they're the ones that will eventually, once it's endorsed and all that. But the problem is, right, some of these new initiatives are very cross-cutting in nature, particularly digital economy. It involves many different ministries, and not just Ministry of Communications, right? So in my report, I did talk about the fact that based on my own experience, is that whether no one likes to create new kinds of institutions, but some kind of short-term, temporary coordinating committee could maybe need to be formed, involving inter-agencies and different governments to implement, whether it's the digital economy framework agreement or different, and with a sunset clause. That means that we'll do this for the next 2-3 years and then we stop once it's implemented, rather than keep it permanent. So that's one of the ways to execute much more of these new and emerging cross-cutting initiatives.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So that was a very thought-provoking 90 minutes. We've gained a deeper understanding of ASEAN's new AEC Strategic Plan, its ambitions, challenges, and what it will take to ensure that ASEAN remains a dynamic, competitive, and people-centered economic community. So with that, first of all, I would like to thank the panel for their time. And I would also like to thank our audience for coming over and being practically engaged with your questions. I wish everyone a great evening ahead. Thank you.